She was just another pawn in Arthur Croft's game. I left her crying in the parking garage. I now had a motive, not greed, but fear, desperation. Croft was a fraud about to be exposed. He was paying someone off, maybe Santangelo, maybe someone else, to buy silence or time. And that someone had decided to collect the final payment and silence him permanently. Or one of his investors had found out and taken revenge. I needed to see the list of investors in Project Icarus. That would be in the company files, which were now doubtless being scoured by the police and the SEC. As I drove, I replayed everything in my head. The hidden safe, the money, the passport, the tape. Croft was a rat, preparing to jump ship. He'd set up the meeting for the payment, and someone had met him there with a knife instead. But who? Santangelo? Voight from Omnicorp? A furious investor? My car phone buzzed a clunky, expensive luxury I'd splurged on. It was Lieutenant Markovich. Malone. Where are you? Driving. What's up, Lieutenant? We got a problem. David Vance. He's in the wind. Skipped out on his follow-up interview. His fancy Firebird is gone. And we just found out something interesting. That knife that was stuck in Arthur Croft's chest? It's a rare antique. A Persian Peshkabz. And guess who's an avid collector of antique weaponry? David Vance, I said, my stomach sinking. Bingo. We're putting out an APB on him now. Looks like your number one suspect is the brother-in-law. It fit. The resentment. The access. The motive? Maybe he found out Croft was about to ruin the family, cut off his meal ticket. Maybe it was a crime of passion, defending his sister's honor. And now he was running. But something felt off. It was too neat, too convenient. Where are you headed, Malone? Markovich asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Just following a hunch, I said, and hung up. I wasn't following a hunch. I was following the money. And the money, $5,000 of it, had come from Evelyn Croft. I drove back to Alpine. The news vans were still there, but fewer now. The story was getting old. I parked down the road and approached the house through the woods again. The place was dark, except for a single light burning in an upstairs window. Evelyn's bedroom, maybe. I found the same side door unlocked. I slipped inside. The house was dead quiet. Too quiet. Even Mrs. O'Malley seemed to have called it a night. I moved through the dark halls toward the study. I had a feeling, a nagging suspicion. I needed to see that safe again. The study door was ajar. A sliver of light spilled out into the hall. I heard a faint sound from inside. A scratching, rustling noise. I pushed the door open slowly. Evelyn Croft was on her hands and knees in front of the open safe. The contents, the leftover cash, the passport were scattered on the floor around her. She was frantically running her hands over the empty interior. A look of sheer panic on her face. She hadn't heard me come in. Looking for this? I said, holding up the VHS tape. She screamed, whirling around, falling back onto the carpet. Her eyes were wide with terror. You? She gasped. What is that? You know what it is, Evelyn. Or you suspected. It's the reason you hired me. Not to find your husband. To find this. You knew he was cheating. You knew he was planning to run. You wanted to know what he was hiding in that safe before the police found it. She stared at me, her chest heaving. The mask of the grieving widow was gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. He was going to ruin us, she whispered. Leave me with nothing. Everything was tied up in the company. I'd be left penniless. I heard him on the phone, talking about his escape plan. I knew about the safe. I just didn't know the combination. I hired you to find him, yes, but I thought wherever he was, he'd lead you to the combination, or you'd be able to find it where I couldn't. So you used me, I said, my voice flat. I needed to know what was in there. I needed to protect myself. And when I found his body instead, and the safe, I panicked. I thought if I could get the tape, whatever was in there, I could still what? Blackmail him? He's dead, Evelyn. She buried her face in her hands. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. Where's David? Evelyn. Her head snapped up. I don't know. The police said he's missing. They think he did it. Did he? No. David is a fool, but he's not a killer. He wouldn't. The knife was his, Evelyn. It was from his collection, yes. But it was stolen. Weeks ago. He reported it to the insurance company. Convenient. Too convenient. I looked at her, at the panic in her eyes. She was telling the truth. At least, she believed her brother wasn't the killer. But if not David, then who? Santangelo? Voight? I thought about the timeline. Croft goes to the storage locker to make his final payment. He's killed. The Project Icarus files are deleted from the server. The prototype is stolen. The deletion happened after he was dead. So the killer had access to the office, to the server, or had forced someone to do it. Cynthia Blair had an alibi. Richard Shaw was a nervous wreck, but he didn't seem like a killer. Who else had had access? I thought about the gardener. Miguel, the one who barely spoke English. The one who was always around. Invisible. The police, I said slowly. Did they question the staff? Thoroughly? Evelyn looked confused. Yes, of course. Mrs. O'Malley, Miguel, they both have alibis. Miguel was visiting his brother in Elizabeth on Friday night. The police verified it. Verified it. But how thoroughly? A brother in Elizabeth. It would be easy to check. But what if the brother covered for him? What if Miguel wasn't who he seemed? It was a long shot. A crazy long shot. But it was the only thread I had left. I left Evelyn sitting on the floor of the study and ran out to my car. I dug through the file I'd started on the case, the list from Cynthia Blair. There was an address for the staff, Miguel Hernandez. A P.O. box in West New York. That wasn't good enough. I needed to find him now. I drove back to the diner where it had all begun, the Oasis. It was late, but it was always open. I slid into the same booth, ordered another cup of coffee, and used the payphone again. I called an old buddy down at the DMV, called in a favor. It took him 20 minutes, but he came back with a home address for Miguel Hernandez, an apartment in Union City. I was about to leave when the TV above the diner counter, tuned to the nightly news, caught my attention. In breaking news, the manhunt for David Vance, the brother-in-law of slain billionaire Arthur Croft, has ended tragically. Vance's vehicle was found wrecked at the bottom of a ravine off the Palisades Parkway. Authorities say he appears to have lost control of the car at high speed. He was pronounced dead at the scene. While not officially confirmed, sources say this closes the investigation into the murder of Arthur Croft. I stared at the screen, at the footage of a twisted wreck being winched up from the woods. David Vance. Dead. It was all too perfect. The angry, resentful brother-in-law killed in a fiery crash after murdering the family meal ticket. Case closed. The world would move on. But I wasn't buying it. I drove to Union City, to the address my friend had given me. It was a run-down tenement building. I buzzed the apartment for Hernandez. No answer. I tried the super, flashed my license, and lied through my teeth about a family emergency. He grumbled, but gave me the key. Miguel's apartment was a small, sparse studio. Neat, clean, and almost completely empty. It looked like no one really lived there. In the closet, there were a few changes of clothes. Under the bed, I found a locked metal box. I used my lockpicks. Inside, there was no personal memorabilia, no photos of a family. Instead, there was a passport, Venezuelan, in the name of Rafael Ortega, and a file folder. I opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos of Arthur Croft, detailed notes on his schedule, and a single typewritten page. It was a contract for the termination of Arthur Croft. The price, $200,000. Half paid up front, the other half to be paid upon confirmation of the target's death and the acquisition of the asset. The client was listed only by a code name, Icarus. But it wasn't a code name for a person. It was the project name. The client wasn't a who, it was a what. The client was Project Icarus itself, or rather, the investors behind it. I flipped to the last page. There was a signature. A name I knew. The name of the man who had fronted the venture capital for Croft's revolutionary fraudulent chip. William Voight, CEO of Omnicorp. Voight had found out the project was a sham, that his millions were about to evaporate. So he'd hired a professional, a ghost named Rafael Ortega, who had been posing as a gardener named Miguel Hernandez for months to kill Croft, make it look like a falling out with the mob or a crime of passion, and to retrieve the prototype and all the research, not to steal it, but to bury it, to hide the evidence of the fraud. to protect his investment even if it was a sunk cost, to make sure no one ever knew how badly he'd been duped. The final payment. Croft must have gotten wind of the hit. He was going to the storage locker to pay off the assassin to buy his life. But Voight had already paid for the termination. Ortega was just following orders. And David Vance? He must have figured it out. Maybe he'd seen something, suspected the quiet gardener. Voight and his hired killer couldn't let him talk. The car accident would have been easy to arrange. I had it, the whole thing, the motive, the means, the murderer. I heard a creak from the hallway outside. A floorboard. I was out of time. I shoved the contract into my coat pocket and turned just as the door opened. Miguel Hernandez stood there, but he wasn't the nervous, humble gardener anymore. His posture was straight, his eyes were cold and flat, and in his hand, he held a pistol with a long, fat silencer attached. "The detective," he said, his voice calm, devoid of any accent. "You are more persistent than you look." "Ortega, I presume," I said, slowly raising my hands. "It's over. I know everything. Voight hired you. Croft was trying to pay you off. You killed him anyway, and you killed David Vance." He gave a slight, dismissive shrug. "A loose end. As are you." He raised the pistol. I had one card left to play. "Voight isn't going to be happy. I've already sent the evidence to the police. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. Your contract. Everything." It was a bluff. A desperate, stupid bluff. Ortega smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "I do not think so. You are a man who works alone. You would not share a payday like this." His finger tightened on the trigger. There was no time to think. I kicked out, knocking a small table between us toward him. The gun coughed, a soft phut sound, and a bullet thudded into the wall behind me. I lunged at him, tackling him around the waist. We crashed into the hallway wall. He was strong, wiry, trained. He brought the gun down hard on the back of my head. White light exploded behind my eyes. I fought through the pain, grabbing his wrist, forcing the gun away. We grappled, stumbling down the hall. He was good, but I was bigger, and I was fighting for my life. We crashed through the door at the end of the hall, into a grimy bathroom. We fell against the sink, and I heard a crack. The gun went skittering across the tiles. Ortega snarled, pulling a knife from his belt. It was another antique, a twin to the one that had killed Croft. He slashed at me. I threw up an arm, and searing pain shot through me as the blade sliced deep. I grunted, falling back against the bathtub. He came at me, knife raised for the killing thrust. I did the only thing I could. I kicked out blindly, my foot connecting with his knee. There was a sickening pop, and he screamed, stumbling forward. I grabbed his wrist again, twisting with all my strength. He fought back, but his leg was buckling. We fell into the bathtub with a crash. I was on top of him now. I slammed his knife hand against the porcelain edge of the tub. Once, twice. He cried out, and the knife clattered away. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I punched him, again and again, in the face, until he stopped moving. I collapsed off of him, breathing in ragged gasps, my arm throbbing where he'd cut me. Blood was everywhere. I looked at his unconscious form in the tub. It was over. I used the phone in his apartment to call Markovich. "You again?" he grumbled. "I've got your killer, Lieutenant, and the guy who really killed David Vance, and the man who paid for it all. You might want to send a couple of cars, one to Union City, and one to William Voight's estate in Saddle River." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're serious?" "Deadly. And tell Columbo he owes me a drink." 2 weeks later, the rain had finally let up, leaving a crisp, clean cold in the air. The story was the scandal of the decade. William Voight was in custody, singing like a canary to avoid the death penalty. Rafael Ortega was in the hospital under heavy guard, facing extradition to about 5 different countries. Croft Electronics was in bankruptcy. The whole sordid tale of fraud and murder was splashed across every front page. I was back in the Oasis Diner, my arm in a sling, working on a plate of bacon and eggs. The door jangled, and Evelyn Croft walked in. She looked different. Older, tired, but less constructed. She was dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. She slid into my booth. I'm leaving, she said without preamble. Going back to my family in Ohio. There's nothing left for me here. What about the money? I asked. The life insurance? There must be something. She shook her head. Voight sued the estate, frozen everything. The insurance company is investigating the murder. It'll be tied up in courts for years. I'm broke, Mr. Malone. Truly broke. She managed a small, sad smile. The $5,000 I gave you, that was the last of my personal cash. I'd like it back if possible. I almost laughed. It was all so pathetic. She'd been a pawn in her husband's game, just like everyone else. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. I'd kept it, unspent, a relic of a case that had gone sideways from the start. I slid it across the table to her. It's all there. She took it, clutching it to her chest like a life preserver. Thank you. She stood to leave. You were a good detective, Mr. Malone. You found the truth. The truth isn't always what people want to find, I said. She nodded, a world of understanding in that simple gesture, and walked out of the diner. I watched her get into a beat-up sedan and drive away, leaving the glittering, rotten world of Arthur Croft behind. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and stepped out into the week afternoon Sunday, another case closed. The bad guys were going away. The client got what she wanted, even if it wasn't what she expected. I got in my Oldsmobile, the seat creaking under my weight. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. On the radio, a synth-pop song was playing, all bright, artificial optimism. I switched it off. I preferred the silence. I pulled out onto Route 17, heading back to my lonely office above the laundromat. The world kept turning. The 80s rolled on. And somewhere, another phone was probably about to ring.